So if we look at what the different options are here that this does, right? If we select a chat, you'll see we're actually storing the chat in our URL parameters. So that's incredibly helpful if you wanted to save state, right? So in terms of what chat you're in, right? This up here, we have our ID, right? The URL is a great place to save state like this, and that's including on an application, right? So that if you ever were to add deep links to your application, you could then potentially share chats in the future, right, with someone, and you could link directly to those chats. Or, for myself personally, maybe I want to bookmark a chat and I want to bookmark one specific one that I always want to jump to. So putting that ID in the URL bar is a great use of that URL for managing state of your application. So anytime we select one, we update that ID in the URL, and then we go ahead and tell our application to open the chat. And you'll see we actually have all of these chats, because when we load this page, so when we load the page, we're actually grabbing our chat list. So this use chat list is a resource. So this is kind of getting into a little bit more of the nitty gritty of Solid.js. But a resource is just a way to fetch data from somewhere and bring it back. And then it gives way, opportunities to refetch that data if you needed to. So you'll see we've just created this resource. We grabbed our current user, and we're just asking Supabase for all of the chats that belong to the user and sorting them by whichever was updated most recently, and then returning that back to the user. So nothing too complicated. Suffice to say, this use chat list is basically a way to go grab the chat list, and then it also provides us this method to refetch that chat list if we ever want to refresh that data for some reason. So we have all of our chats, and then when we actually go to select a chat, right, we're just passing in, again, that reference, that entire structure of our table, right, which has our chat model, our name, the ID of the chat, who owns it, all of those important fields. And then we go ahead and close the drawer so that we're done. And that's about the extent of this. Now, there is all of this code here in the middle. If you're interested at it, I definitely recommend checking out the GitHub for this.
Yeah, where can our viewers see that?
Yeah, so this all lives on my personal GitHub, but this is all open source, right? It's one of the big motivations here at Ionic, is we like to create open source things. So if you jump over into my GitHub, and you can find me on the Ionic team, it's github.com/DallasTJames. Or you can always ping me on Discord, and I will shoot you all of the information you need. We can talk about it. I like to hang out on Discord.
Oh, there you go.
Plug Discord there. Come hang out with me on Discord. It's great. But yeah, so this all exists on my GitHub. I think did I even have that open somewhere? Hey, look at that. I do.
Hey, there we go.
So yeah, so there's the URL if you want to come look at that, right? It's github.com/DallasTJames/Starfleet-AI. So all of this is there. It even talks about, if you want to build up the application. I'll probably improve the README a little bit better, but this is all here, right? Everything that we're looking through is all hosted there on GitHub and is open for anyone who wants to look at it. To talk just a little bit about this, when we have our app, when we're on mobile, if you've ever used side menus on mobile, you always swipe them out, right? At least I do. I don't know if you're like that, Logan, but I just swipe out the menu, you swipe it closed.
Yep.
And Daisy UI, well, it's a fantastic component library. It is a CSS library, which means there's no JavaScript at all in there, which is really cool because it means it's compatible with whatever framework you want to use. But that also means it's missing some of these critical behaviors that you would expect out of an application, like being able to swipe open this bar. So all we've done here is added some event listeners for touch start, touch move, and touch end, so that when we are on mobile, I'll pull this back over. Can you zoom this in? No, it's not going to zoom in. It'd be a little small. Sorry. But if you touch and drag, you get this nice little motion as it pulls it out.
The amazing thing is, with the power of editing, we will be able to zoom in.
There you go. Yeah, it'll be zoomed in post.
Yes.
Yeah, so you can touch and drag, and you can kind of play with this, and it'll move around, and you can flick it open, and then you can flick it closed when it's open. So there you go. Yeah, so it's just a little bit of code there, 100 lines or so, just to kind of get that native feel for when we're on mobile. So that's the majority of the logic in here, is doing all of the fun math of which direction is the user swiping, and should we open the drawer based off of how wide and how far they've gone. And so you can kind of get into the nitty gritty. It's fairly straightforward overall. Yeah, that's our sidebar. So at this point, we've kind of talked through all of the different pieces. So the last little piece to talk about is how do we put this all together, right? We've talked about here's how we have our chats, then we open our chat, and then we display messages, but where do the messages come from? How do we know what messages to load?
Yeah.
Well, again, if you're familiar with React or anything similar, right? We have our context. So we maintain this chat context for our application. And essentially what this is a couple of global signals that just maintain our chat, whatever one is currently open, or null if it's none. And it also maintains all of our messages, or an empty array if there's none. So if we look down at our chat context, we've kind of built this out using that like hook style context. So we have our use chat context we can use anywhere. We're grabbing our reference to Supabase so we can use this. And then we just return an object with a bunch of tools that we can use everywhere. So our chat object here is our current chat. So you'll see this is the signal. If we look up here, right? Our current chat is the signal with our chat. We have our messages, which again is the signal with our messages. So we're providing these signals to all of the different components that need to use them so that Solid can optimize that rendering behavior for us. We also expose a method for adding a message. So we grab our message type. We expect an instance of our database table. We do a quick check to see if there's an existing index. So if the message already exists, that's great. We'll just update it with whatever data came back. And I've left a little comment here, right? This is useful for if our streaming breaks down. So if, how we stream those messages back to the UI, if that breaks down, the database will send us a copy when it's all done. And we'll go in and we can just update it so that it will fill in all of the details. So we don't actually lose any data. And then we'll go ahead and return that. If we don't find it, we'll just append it to the end of the message list. We have our send for response. So this is probably the most complex part of the application itself, where we're going to take this message, and you'll recall we use this as part of our input bar, right? At the very end, after we've saved our human message, we call this send for response, right? So we look at this, we're pulling this out of our chat context. So send for response, we're going to go ahead and we're going to preemptively create an AI response, right? We're going to say we're expecting one to show up, and we're going to set it to empty message because it hasn't responded yet. And we're going to go ahead and plop that right in the AI or right in the UI, right? Again, we're being optimistic so that we're getting very fast, snappy results from our UI. We're not waiting for a database. We're not waiting for an API. We want the user interface to be responsive. So we're going to go ahead and plop that AI response into our UI. And you'll remember with our AI message, if that text is empty, we're going to show that loading dots. So that's where you get that loading indicator saying that, we're waiting for a response to our, there we are. We're waiting for that response because we've added it to the UI, but we don't have a response back, right? So if we look at this again, we'll scroll down and be like, give me a story. You'll see we get that loading indicator right there, right? That's all preemptive because we've added that before we've made any calls to the database or anything like that. I feel like it's even telling us a story about the planet Starfleet.
It's writing you an entire script for Star Trek.
That's what it looks like, huh? Dazzling purple lightning, a curious scientist named Kara. It's pretty fun. We'll have to come back.
Wow, it is going. It is.
Yeah.
It has a lot to say.
It's going to use all of my OpenAI budget there. So that's our optimistic behavior, right? Once that's done, we're going to grab our Supabase session, and then we're going to just make in a call here. Right? We're going to call our Supabase URL, our functions, and our chat function. So we have an edge function. We haven't talked about this yet, other than to say this is part of our workspace. So we'll jump over to there. We have a chat function that we're going to call. And essentially, the goal of this chat function is to take in the message, and it's to talk to OpenAI. And the reason we do all of that as part of a Supabase function, as opposed to doing it here, is because our OpenAI key is it's a secret key, right? You should be careful with what you do with that. You shouldn't put that into a public context. So anything in our application here is all public context. So if we look at our env file, and I'll make sure to click the right one. Right, we have our Supabase URL, right? This is an actual hosted instance, right? You could actually go this, you could plug these information in, and you could access my Supabase instance. These are all part of the repository because it's totally okay to have these. These are public values, right? You can share these around. However, your OpenAI key that you will use as part of this chat function is not something that you can share around, right? That's something you need to keep because that's what gives access to your OpenAI account. So we're going to use an edge function here so we can keep that secure on the back end. So we have our Supabase URL. We're going to post to our functions, to our chat function that we will create. We'll talk about that in a bit. We're going to pass in the message that the user is typed out. We're going to send this message ID, right? And you'll see this is the ID of the AI response message. And so that's how it will know to actually send back information for this message that we optimistically put into our UI. We're going to send up our headers, including our authorization, right? We want to make sure that our user is authorized with the access token. And then we're going to listen for an on message, and we're going to handle stream message. So you'll see this is actually fetch event source instead of fetch. This is what allows that streaming behavior. This is just a third-party library. So if we pop into our package JSON, right, fetch event source, this was a package built by Microsoft. This is what LangChain uses in a lot of their documentation for doing this. So that's where I grabbed that from. And that's all this is doing is allowing that streaming back to the UI, right? So as we get each individual piece, we grab our message, and then you'll see we're just going to handle our stream message. We're going to say, the data that comes back is going to get attached to this. This handle stream message is just up here above. And you'll see we're going to, so this is a fun fact. If you've ever used the official ChatGPT app, right, whenever the AI types, it like vibrates your phone a little bit. So one of the fun things we've done with Capacitor, and we'll talk about this when we come back to the Capacitor side of things, is we actually replicate that and get that same haptic feedback, it just makes it more fun to use. So for every little piece of information that comes back from the API, we're going to just hit that haptic engine a little bit. And then we're going to go into our set messages, and we're going to go ahead and update your message. There is one little exception here. So anytime we get blank characters, this was my experience with the API. I'm sure there's better ways to do this and actual handlings for this. But any blank characters or blank message is essentially a new line. So this will go through, it'll take our message. It's going to append this to the previous, whatever was existing there before. And it's going to update our UI with it. So that's what gives us that nice streaming behavior, so where it looks like, all of the text is just coming in, as the AI types it back out for you. And that's our chat context. We've got a couple other helper methods to remove a message from the UI, right? We talked about we're optimistic here. So if something goes wrong, we can use this to remove the message. And we also have a way to reset messages in case we ever need to clear them out, or we open a new chat that has new messages. We'll reset all of the messages that are in there. And one other helper for when we want to open a new chat that will set the current chat and clear out the current messages. So that's the entirety of our context, and that really is the entirety of our application. So we put all of those things together, and that gives us this lovely experience of our Capacitor application, right? We have our different chats here. You can see we can load those in. We can type in and tell me another joke, please. We get this nice little streamed back response, right? And we get this nice little joke about a bicycle falling over.
Because it was too tired. Oh, and it's even telling dad jokes too.
It's
all right.
Dad jokes.
It's telling jokes.
That's part of the prompt. It's a requirement.
So now now that we've kind of seen like the web side of the application, how do we get this on mobile? What does the mobile section look like for this?
Yeah. So to bring this to mobile, so this is what I love about Capacitor and why I think it's one of the best ways to build mobile apps. We've built this really great web application. We've built it with mobile responsiveness in mind. So to bring this to Capacitor looks incredibly simple. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. There's like 2 or 3 steps realistically that we need to do. First, we're going to come to our package JSON. We're going to install the Capacitor CLI. So if we open this up here. We'll go ahead and clear that out. The root of our project. So if we're going to do this, if we were doing this fresh, right, we're going to go ahead. I use PNPM. I have an alias for PN, but PNPM, right? And we're going to add Capacitor CLI as a dev dependency. Right, we've already done that. So that's the very first thing we got to do. Once we've done that, then we can do npx or PNPM cap init. All right. And when you do cap init, it's going to create this capacitor config file. It'll ask you a couple of questions. You know, what do you want to name your application? What do you want the bundle identifier to be? Right. It's a couple of questions, and that's what generates this file here. And then the last real step you have to do is actually install Capacitor. So there are 3 core parts that you need. You need Capacitor core, and then the platforms that you want. So in this case, I'm deploying to both Android and iOS, and then any plugins. So in my case, I'm only using one. All right, I want to access the haptic engine. So now we can go PNPM add at Capacitor, and then we're going to say we want core, Android, iOS, and haptics. Okay. We're going to add all 4 of those. So we would run that command, and it would install all of those for us. At that point, now we can tell Capacitor, you know, generate my projects for me. So we're going to do PNPM cap add iOS. It's going to add our iOS project, and cap add Android. So all of these Capacitor CLI commands are, you know, they're in the documentation on the Capacitor.js website. They're all meant to be run locally like this, right? So Capacitor CLI is not a global CLI that you might install like some other project types would be. It's just local to your project, and that's why we run them like this. Once we have that done, we're good to go. So I made one change.
So that's my build. It? That's all it takes to get it to mobile?
That's it. That's on mobile. You know, I made one change here to where every time we do a build, it's just going to copy the build assets over into Capacitor. So if we do npm run build, and so you'll see this will run through. It'll just take super quick, right? So our build took 2 seconds. Copying this over into iOS and web and Android took, you know, milliseconds. And then we can use this PNPM cap open to actually open a project. So we'll do iOS for the example. So it's going to open our Xcode workspace. So we've got Xcode open now. This, again, I've been already testing on this a little bit, right? So you can see that I have my bundle identifier here. I already have my signing team, and all of my signing certificates have been set up. If this is your first time doing this, you'd have to set those up yourself. But it really is just like click a button. And we're going to go ahead and build this. I would do it to my iPhone, but then no one would be able to see it. And so we'll just pull up our iPhone 14 Pro, and we'll go ahead and spin this up to the emulator here. Cool. So we've, you know, you hit that play button, and we get our simulator popped open over here with our application running. So we can go ahead. Yes, I know how to type on a keyboard. Thank you. And so let's go ahead and sign in on this. I should sign into this one. And we get signed in, and you'll see we have our select chat. Again, we can't send messages because we haven't picked one. We can open up our side menu here. We can see all of our messages. We can see our joke was the most recent one. We've got our joke here. Oh, hey, look, I was trying to figure out how to zoom in Xcode last time in between cuts.
You've been caught.
Oh, no. Ignore that. Hey, look, here's our story again. Nothing too crazy happened there.
I am 100% keeping that in the cut.
Yeah, it'll be great. So, okay, so then we'll pull these up side by side because we can kind of see them working together. So we have our application. We have our web version of it. If we look, there it is again. So we've got our Capacitor show. We've got both of our texts. And if we pop over into mobile, we can grab our keyboard here, and we can, you know, just hello world this. We'll send that. You can see our hello world popped up automatically over here. You also see we don't get the streaming in the web version, but when it completes, we get that new version. And that's because, you know, the web version didn't request the stream. So if we come back, we can, tell me another story, so that it gives us a bunch of text. But you'll see we get that nice, streaming behavior on our application. If you're running this on a physical device that you can actually feel, you get that nice haptic feedback. Man, I wish I had a good way to show that on stream, because it would be so good. It's so good. You have to go clone this, build it from source, and just so you can experience it, because it's that good.
One day in the future, we'll be able to capture this.
One
the
day.
haptics on this. One day.
It'll be great. So we finished our story, and we see that was replicated over here. And, that definitely goes both ways too.
That's amazing. So this application is like truly cross-platform then. Like it basically, not only can you like deploy it and have it on mobile, but then like it actually will show up with all of your chats across whatever device you're looking at it through.
Yes. Yep. It keeps it all in sync. We've got our nice little slidey menu, right? I'm pretty proud of that behavior. I think that's pretty, it's pretty great. This is absolutely cross-platform. And I mean, it took us 10, 15 minutes. And we cut some things out as well of me trying to figure out how to zoom in Xcode. And it still only took 10, 15 minutes. That's legitimately how long it takes to just take our web application that was mobile friendly, right? We went through the time to make sure it styles well for mobile, and it just drops right into our application.
And it just does it.
And it just does it, right? And then you get to